Slug with horns, okay.
Hey, Tariq, I love it when the Cincinnati Reds are good, you know, and geez, they're good. And when you look up and down the standings of the Major League Baseball as we head into the July 4th holiday weekend, there's all these teams that weren't supposed to be there. Preseason, 15 to 20% chance of making the playoffs, if that, are competing. And some guys aren't.
We'll get to my Mets. Trust me, we'll have plenty of time on that. But you know what's interesting about this? Baltimore is still hanging around. Yeah. The Angels, who have always been terrible, have found a way to hang around. The Cincinnati Reds. It's bizarre sort of how baseball started to work here, whereas the Yankees not having their footing yet, the Mets totally off of their game right now. Dodgers still holding it together a bit, what they got. San Diego still surprised about them. Toronto's supposed to be great, and they're not really into it. And Boston might be creeping up there later on. Listen, they're not that far away from the wild card. I'm not saying division, wild card, because Tampa's got that a lot.
They're finished in the top three of that division, which is be the real problem, that Boston's looking at. I mean, because you can't make it work if you don't find two teams in that division to beat.
Yeah, I don't know. I just find a way to believe that Baltimore let them enjoy their run. Same thing with the Cincinnati Reds. Same thing with the Angels.
Well, are you saying they won't last?
No, I think Houston will find a way to get it back up there. Maybe Boston will run a thrill later
Baltimore?
at the end. We know how baseball works for Baltimore and Anaheim. They don't really last in those spots. They tend to fall.
But here's what you're doing. You're thinking old baseball playoff rules, right?
True.
And I think you could attribute not only what's happening now, but the fact that all of these teams are going to do what they can to stay in this race to the expanded playoffs, right? Because there are teams, walking into the season, what's the point of even trying? Pittsburgh forever and ever and ever, because there's no way we're going to compete. Now that you have an opportunity to work your way into, a short series up front and see what happens, more teams are willing to spend that money.
With a long history of doing things poorly, like the major, when they tweaked that playoff system, and they really didn't do that much. They added one team and they made it a best of three instead of one, but they engaged a lot more teams to stay involved.
Well, I mean, but the same thing has happened in the NFL too, where all of a sudden, those teams that were so far out of it, well, now there's a glimmer of hope. And if there's a glimmer of hope, people are going to buy tickets to come out to the ballpark. In a gate-driven league like Major League Baseball is, that is very important. The owners are making money on this.
And baseball, full well, that hot team going into the playoffs somehow goes on a magical run. It happens in NHL hockey too, where there's a team that was dominant all year long, and then the hot team, hot goaltender, next thing you know, they go on a run, they get in a series, and they win the Stanley Cup.
Vegas still doesn't buy it, though, because I'm looking at the odds on these things, and I think it's something like 40-1 against the Reds to win the World Series. Mm-hmm. It's 8-1 on the Yankees.
Yeah, but I mean, that makes sense, too. Although, you're right, the AL East is a juggernaut right now. Cincinnati's young. Cincinnati is very rarely there. And I think that the expectations of franchises make a difference, too. If the Yankees don't make it to the World Series this year, it's house cleaning time in New York. Yeah. Whereas if Cincinnati makes it to the playoffs, they're going to have a freaking parade for them.
And oh, by the way, baseball's going to have to start marketing some of these stars. I don't know too many of the big name players on these major league rosters that are playing extremely well. They got it. Shohei is one guy, but they've got to show other talents and players in this all-star game and try to get them other than Ronald Acuna and all these other different names that people barely know.
But even with the superstars, right? Shohei Ohtani, Tuesday has one of the greatest games in the history of baseball. I only got to see it on highlights, and half the people I talked about it with that day didn't know what I was talking about.
And oh, by the way, the All-Star game in Seattle. My goodness.
Ellie De La Cruz.
Yeah.
A name to know. Cincinnati shortstop.